Hello there, welcome back to Conversations in Sustainability, a podcast exploring the biggest issues shaping Australia and the world. I'm your host, Alice Johnson. In October 2024, just 2 short months from the time of recording, Sydney will host the world's first Global Nature Positive Summit. Businesses, academics and government reps alike will be descending, hopefully in droves, to the International Convention Centre. They're going to ask what society needs to do to address biodiversity loss and, importantly, how we pay for it. And with up to 1 million species currently facing extinction and almost half of Australia's GDP dependent on nature, the time for ambitious, coordinated action couldn't come a moment too soon. Today we're going to be looking at what role businesses play in addressing this issue. And it's my pleasure to welcome on the show a sustainability professional leading corporate Australia's approach to mapping and addressing nature impact. Today's guest is Sally Townsend, Head of Sustainability for Blackmores Australia. Welcome, Sally.
Thank you, Alice.
Sally, let's start at the beginning. For any listeners who aren't working really closely in the nature space, what exactly are we talking about and what's your role in this issue?
Effectively, what we're talking about is how we actually not only stop nature loss, but integrate it into our net zero pathways. So I think sustainability has been a big focus for businesses for a lot of years, but that's really rapidly accelerating and we're seeing it being mandated to be included in things like financial statements for climate disclosures. And I don't think it'll be too far in the future before we can start to expect nature to join that table. And there's a lot that the business community needs to do to ramp up our activity, our systems, and even our understanding of the issue so that we're prepared for that when it does come in.
Has nature been a bit of the poor cousin on the sustainability agenda next to climate?
I think it's just not as well understood. When you have a look at climate, the basic unit of measurement of it is universal. It's relatively simple. There are decades of pathways to follow in how other businesses have approached it. If you have a look at what businesses are doing, it's relatively aligned. It's about moving to clean energy, about moving to renewables, about introducing energy efficiency, about understanding our footprint. Nature is innately more complex, and I'll talk to you a little bit about the complexity within our own business, and from that to start to understand that we're going to have to be far more innovative and far more collaborative in how we actually, first of all, understand the nature dilemma and the climate-nature nexus, but then also how we work together to solve for it.
Yeah, fantastic. So let's dive into that. So all businesses interact with nature to some extent, but my understanding is it's quite a strong dependency and relationship that Blackmores has with the natural world. I saw you speak at the Bush Heritage Women for the Environment event, and you said more than 900 ingredients are currently used, procured from over 170 suppliers in 36 countries. So a big, complicated supply chain with a lot of different touch points with nature.
Yeah, but even more so, as far as every business goes, more than half of our global economy actually depends on nature. So what that means is that more than half of the world's economy at the moment is under threat because of nature loss. It's in the top 10 global risks in the next decade. In our sector in particular, it's very relevant. 15,000 of the 50,000 herbs that are used therapeutically currently face extinction. And we often say nature is our number one supply chain partner. We know that nature is going to provide 30% of the climate mitigation that's going to be needed to meet the goals of the Paris Agreement. Last year, the big sort of lights on moment for us was last year when we had the privilege of co-hosting an event with the World Economic Forum's Climate and Nature Lead, and they brought out an entourage of experts, including an Earth Commissioner. And
what a title!
We were working as part of a cross-sectoral dialogue on the importance of valuing nature, and those sessions for us really delivered 2 very clear sentiments. The first was that as a global community, we have breached so many planetary boundaries and we've passed tipping points that will fundamentally compromise our food security, our natural systems, and a future where people can live in a safe and just world.
Pretty frightening stuff.
It is. And we also learned, though, the opportunity is that nature is an impact multiplier. And so we know that we can't get to net zero without nature-based solutions. And that's why this really rapidly gained a lot of focus on our agenda. Over the last 3 years or so, we've been aware of those growing expectations for us to not only understand our impacts and dependency on nature, but to get to the point where we're in a position to disclose those. And for us, this has been about learning an entirely new language. 3 years ago, we weren't talking about ecosystem services. We didn't understand issues like water regulation or how much reliance we had on pollination in order to access our herbs. And even though we run a manufacturing facility, we've got a packing facility, we've got a distribution centre, those are not where our most significant interfaces with nature are. We actually use very modest amounts of water relative to other industries. We're pretty responsible in how we divert our waste for recovery, and we're not clearing land. We're using things like clean energy. So what we really learned was our greatest interface is in our supply chain, as you said. It's very global. There's lots of herbs. We use a lot of marine sources, and they're from very specific geographic locations. So they have to be grown in specific climates to make sure that they've got particular properties that give them a therapeutic benefit. We've been talking a little bit to winemakers, and we're similar in that sense that we've got an optimal set of conditions and a range of stress that make a grape grown to have excellent vintage. And I think therapeutic ingredients have very similar specific requirements. There's one particular herb that we get from a distributor, and that distributor works with 20 different farms. And previously, when you're looking through our sourcing standard, our priority was all about the quality of that product and the integrity of the supplier. But as we're evolving that and starting to think about our sustainable sourcing, we're looking at things like soil nutrient cycling and climate stability and water use, which are things that we've never had to do before. And when you multiply that across 900 ingredients that we are getting from 170 odd suppliers from 36 countries, valuing our natural capital isn't something we're going to be in a position to do overnight. We're not going to be able to just switch this on. But if we get this right, our hope is that we end up with a much more resilient supply chain, and also that we've deepened a lot of our supplier partnerships. So we're going into this not only to understand those risks that started the journey, but also to start to understand how we can create value.
Fantastic. There was a lot in there about the internal journey you've had to go on, upskilling team, but doing things differently, effectively. How did you get that buy-in piece? How did you get that on the agenda to go through such a comprehensive journey and change process?
Well, yeah, we're a naturopathic company, so we've got a lot of naturopaths, and they look at the body as a very delicate balance of natural systems, knowing that given the right conditions, the body can heal itself. And I think that's how holistically we look at planetary health as well. So that respect for nature is already at the heart of our business. But if you're thinking about the expertise that's needed for this, our expertise is really at the moment in the therapeutic use of natural ingredients and quality natural medicines formulation and manufacturing. And this emerging work on natural capital really we need understanding of things like ecology and marine biology and botany and all sorts of other scientific disciplines that we don't have. So we've needed to partner with others in order to get to the point where we're understanding what the issue is. And going into this as well, we've got a business that's very good at assigning value to things like financial capital and operational capital and even human capital. But when the systems that relate to 50% of our economic security are currently undervalued in our business models, and they're undervalued in our risk frameworks, and they're definitely not represented in a lot of our business strategies. And so that's why we have needed to engage very broadly across the business. The one advantage I think that I had that a lot of my peers don't have is we have a CEO who stepped forward to lead this. Knowing that we had such a strong dependency on nature was a pretty powerful motivator in that. But really, every business has a dependency. And that's not well understood. When we attended the TNFD launch here in Australia, the executive director of TNFD, Tony Goldner, wasn't talking about koala habitats or food security. He was talking about semiconductors, which are the tech chips that are used in cars and in computers, because it takes massive amounts of water to make them, and most of them come from water-stressed regions. So that makes it a global business continuity risk. Having conversations with other businesses, we know that any company selling products needs to be asking where the trees are coming from that are being cleared to make cardboard boxes. Car companies needing to think about where they get access to rubber for tyres or the impact on extracting the metals that they're actually needing. We've learnt that it takes 100 litres of water to make a bottle of wine. Closer to our sector, more than half of commercially available drugs come from wild species.
Yeah.
And so there is this big dependency that everyone has on nature that is currently understood.
Mm-hmm. I assume a lot of people think nature and think partnerships to plant trees, save koalas, but it is a much more core business function, isn't it? It's about where we get our materials and what impact that has and the risk that has on our business. You mentioned TNFD, so I'd love to unpack this a bit more. So there is a broader regulatory landscape that I imagine has been a big motivator for you guys. Talk us through what that lovely acronym, the world of sustainability, there's plenty of them. What's this one all about?
Well, we're pretty familiar with the TCFD, which is the Task Force on Climate-Related Financial Disclosures. Mm-hmm. But the TNFD is its counterpart on how we integrate nature into financial reporting. The recommendations that are in the TNFD have been in draft and iterating through this open design process for the last few years. And over that time, it's given a global community of early piloting companies the opportunity to really learn.
And Blackmores has been one of those
one of those early pilots, yeah. And for us, committing to adopt TNFD before it's introduced as a mandatory requirement has a whole bunch of advantages. What it really means for us is that we've got alignment through our business on the importance of this as a piece of work. That can be really helpful for us when we're trying to assign resources or to secure investment to make progress. It gives us the chance also to integrate our climate and our nature disclosures, which is a far more efficient way of approaching it. And it shows a certain degree of transparency to our supply chain partners because we're asking for a lot of transparency of them. And it's really important that we send that early message that this is something that we have high ambition in.
Yeah, absolutely. Sets that agenda. So we talked a little bit about getting that buy-in from the team side of things, but what about the supply chain? Blackmores has been leading the Australian Climate Leaders Coalition Nature Working Group for a while. Tell us a little bit about that work and what are you seeing in the wider community? What progress are you seeing from some of those other participants? What challenges are they facing?
Yeah, we learnt very early on, I think, by engaging with so many different businesses on this, that the biggest thing holding back progress is that across the business community, we've got limited capability to deliver on this. We've got no capacity and we've got a lot of competing priorities, especially with mandatory climate disclosures sitting on our doorstep at the moment. It's also really hard to solve a problem that's overwhelmingly complex and a problem that's not well understood. We know that nature is a really key supply chain partner for so many businesses. It's also a very key social license to operate issue for many others. But this is a new language. It's about understanding not only our nature impacts and dependencies, but also starting to measure and assign value to it. And we're really just starting to scale up to be in a position to do that. But anyone that has ever learned a new language knows the best way to do it is to really immerse yourself into it and to use it frequently in consistency. And I think we're 1.5 years into collaborating on tools and approaches to work through those challenges. And we're starting to see some really inspiring progress coming from across very diverse sectors.
So now there are some of these interesting tools emerging, but for you guys, not so much. You were those sort of early adopters figuring it out from scratch. So could you talk us through that journey, step by step? How have you guys approached this challenge?
Well, we started off not even knowing where to start and thinking there was absolutely no data. The one piece of data we did have was from our modern slavery program, and that's because human rights risk and nature risk are both location-based. So we could use that information to identify hotspots. So it all started with a map of locations. We knew what the mega diverse regions were. We knew where nature risk was higher. We also knew where governments had made strong nature commitments that could mean they'd be more likely to have transition risks. We had insights on what were the most vulnerable nutrient sources from a scientific literature review that Blackmores Institute had published in 2019, and that was on the vulnerability of natural medicine to climate impacts. And we also had some insights that came out of our climate resilience action plan. So that was our real starting point when we realised we actually, with our lack of expertise in this, couldn't actually go any further, and we needed to engage Pollination Group, who have amazing expertise in this. Mm-hmm. So together we piloted what the TNFD call a LEAP assessment. on one key botanical ingredient that we use in a bunch of different products. Since then, we've trialled a marine ingredient so that we can start to understand not only the terrestrial and land-based nature risks, but also the ocean-based ones.
And were there stark differences?
Absolutely. But there are also lots of similarities and a way for us to start thinking about how we can systemize this as well. We piloted it by doing this with supplier support, and also we tried a different way to see whether or not we'd be able to assess it. And that's when we realised what a team effort nature really is. So that was year one. And after that point, we realised we can't replicate this 900 more times.
Oh, God.
So in year two, we developed a materiality matrix and we segmented all of those ingredients by the origin of the materials, whether they came from a farm, a fishery, a forest for wild harvested ingredients, or a factory. And then we're able to create a heat map of the most likely nature impacts and dependencies that would help us prioritise our efforts. And they really helped us develop some supplier questionnaires as well. So we're using many of those insights at the moment to do things like updating sourcing standards. We've been able to do financial sensitivity assessment to quantify the impact of nature risk as well. And we're quickly starting to lose count of how many risk assessments we've done since then, because slowly but surely we're starting to get our heads around not only the operational but also the financial dependency on nature, and how we think about our relationship with our climate resilience action plan, how we think about updating our enterprise risk framework, and even how we think about how these insights are relevant for our broader business strategy.
A huge piece of work, and I'm hearing probably a lot of collaboration, cross-sector collaboration internally with financial teams, risk teams. Is the role of head of sustainability changing? Are you getting a whole new skill set?
I'm definitely getting a whole new skill set, but I think that's always been the role, is to be the hammer looking for the nail.
Yeah.
And to really try and, we often speak in the Climate Leaders Coalition about nature being a piece of work that needs to grow tentacles into other pieces of work that sit within business. It definitely isn't something that sits separate as its own discrete strategy. It's something that needs to be integrated into our ways of working. And to do that, there needs to be a lot of engagement and communication and growing understanding together, which is why I think it's another great advantage to starting early, because it gives you the time to do that and to build up those skills. And the benefit for us, I think, has been this is a really interesting piece of work that people enjoy working on. And I think this is part of people wanting to work for a purpose-led business, which I think was an unexpected co-benefit that we really got from going into what essentially started off as a risk management exercise.
Absolutely. So what about for businesses just starting out? What tools are out there now? Because we've talked about a lot of process, a lot of steps that you've gone through. Where do they get started?
Well, to start off with, there is more data than you think. I know that most people I speak to say, oh, we're waiting for the data to build up, but we haven't yet had an issue with the current data sets that are available as far as just getting started. You will need to tap into outside expertise, but if you are going to transform your ways of working to have a nature-positive future, you can't outsource nature. It is something that needs to be integrated into your business and to develop that capability. So we always just say start small, learn and scale it from there. We started with a homemade map and one single leap assessment. When we collaborated and worked with the Climate Leaders Coalition peers on how we could take what we'd all learned really from our first year or two of getting started in nature and help to accelerate others' progress, we were asked by someone to go, I just really need a simple assessment tool just to help get started. And so co-created by that nature working group and with very generous support of PwC's Impact Assembly, we were able to create a digital tool called NatStart. It has more than 1,000 insights that are in it. It doesn't duplicate or overlap anything in TNFD. It is written from a business lens and it's the precursor to TNFD. It takes the user through understanding why nature. So that's a lot of evaluating what stakeholders you're exposed to and why you'd actually get started on nature. It helps you set your organisational boundary for getting started. So for us, for example, we're joint ventures within our organisational boundary. Were we just looking at our direct operations or we focused on one particular aspect of our supply chain?
So clarifying scope.
The second big sort of aspect of clarifying your scope is setting your geographic boundary. And so that really is where the tool connects you with existing data sets that already exist. There's some great ones out there like Encore or IBAT or the WWF Biodiversity Risk Map. It prompts you then to consider your interface with nature. So the interface for someone who farms and grows on the land is very different to someone who is from the extraction or building industry. And that's very different from someone who works in the service industry who might instead have, an arm's length from their interface with nature as well. It prompts a lot of engagement with First Nations communities, which is a very important part of this broader landscape. And it prompts you to consider your access to data, to have a look at what your existing technology is, and to consider what skills and capability you have within your organisation. And that lands you at assessment readiness. And this report that is essentially generated out of NatStart would be the foundation for your first business case to get started on nature. And it might help you be able to identify if you were piloting an ingredient or a site or an aspect of your business, where would be a pragmatic place to start.
Fantastic. NatStart. That sounds like a fantastic tool. I want to wrap up with a last question about prioritising. So we've mentioned climate disclosures coming down the line, which I know is systemic change for some businesses. It's a huge priority. But then how does nature fare in the raft of sustainability challenges that organisations are worrying about? We've got modern slavery, human rights programs, circularity, obviously a deep interconnection between all these issues. But where do you start to prioritise? How do you know where to start?
I think you nailed it when you said they are deeply interconnected. A lot of this started for us with, as a health company, understanding that twin crisis of climate and nature is ultimately a health crisis, and that's something that does compel us to act. But now that we're a little bit further down in our understanding of it, we can see now just how closely related the disclosures of the TCFD, the climate-related financial disclosures, and the nature-related financial disclosures are designed to align. From our very first early experience, our using that insight that came from the human rights assessment, there are data sets that would be complementary to each other. And it wasn't until after we'd actually completed that first phase of work that we recognised that in doing our first nature risk assessment, we were also able to undertake a full human rights audit. And it was our first end-to-end profile of Scope 3 emissions, because they've all got similar challenges, which is data, transparency, and being location-based. So the opportunity is to consider them collectively as a much more efficient way of working. Across other areas that we're looking at that have a strong relationship with our nature work, things like water management, it is a natural resource, so it does directly relate back to your nature disclosures, but it can be solved for by embedding circular solutions, and it's a key Scope 3 for us. So that's a 3-for-1 if we can solve for water efficiency and water management, where we're getting a nature, a climate, and a circularity benefit. So for us, more increasingly, I think it's about how we can make sure that all of these things, we're transforming the way that we think about our relationship with the natural environment and the people in it, as opposed to delivering on all of these different discrete mandatory reporting disclosure requirements or elements of sustainability reporting, instead starting to think about how we rewire our business to have a better relationship with people and the planet.
That's a pretty good summary of the whole mission here, isn't it? Rewiring our businesses. I think that's all we've got time for today, but a huge thank you, Sally. It's been a fantastic discussion.
Thanks, Alice.